Thank you everyone for joining us and hello internet. And today we are talking about Policy Reporter, a policy reporter for Kyverno. So let me introduce a small bit about what Policy Reporter is and what the motivation behind this tool. Kyverno ships with two types of validation. You can either enforce a rule or audit it. If you don't want to block developers or if you want to try out a new rule, you can use the audit functionality. The audit configuration creates policy reports which you can access with kubectl, because I can't find a simple uh, which you can use with access with the kubectl. And policy report has integrated with Grafana, Loki, Elasticsearch, or Slack. And I'm really happy today because I am joined by the co-author and founder of this Kyverno Policy Reporter, Frank Yogalite. Thank you, Frank, for joining us today.
Yeah,
First, your introduction, where you live, what you work, and then we start demoing out this project.
yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. So I'm Frank. I'm working at Levu. It's a German-based dating platform. We are located in Dresden, in Germany, in Saxonia. And yeah, besides my daily work, I'm contributing to tools like Kyverno, also Falco. And yeah, I created the policy report and I'm happy to show it today.
Yes, and we have our common friend, developer guy, is also in the comments. So thank you very much, developer guy, for joining us today. So this is a policy reporter for the Kyverno, and we have a very good talk last day, for the last week about Kyverno, what 1.8 bring to the table for the Kyverno community. So this is also available on this channel. And today we talk about Policy Reporter because Reporter brings in visibility into the Kyverno. So Frank will show us some of the cool demos and some of the recent demos about this talk as well. So he's also give a speech on Container Days recently. And before we start damming, just tell us about your experience on the Container Day event.
Yeah, it was a really cool event. I met many people from the community, very nice experience. Also, my talk went quite nice with some demo issues, but yeah, it was still fine for me. And really cool 2 days. Also, Hamburg was a cool city to see. Yeah, I can recommend it to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Cool city and a cute and a very wonderful football club as well, Hamburg, if you're following along Bundesliga. So, Frank, if you want to share your screen and start doing the demo, this is your time. So you can share your screen and start talking about it.
Yep. So let's. So everyone should now see the, my browser, hopefully.
Yes, I can see it.
And great. So maybe before I start with the introduction about new parts and how it looks like, one of the first bigger improvements is this new documentation page. In the first stages, the documentation was the wiki in the GitHub repository. It's now a separated page with much more details and more sections. So if you want to look what features Policy Reporter provide and maybe are not introduced or showed today, you can have a look in the documentation where you also have many details about the Helm charts, what you can configure in the different sections, how the subcharts are working. I hope it's a good source about the different aspects of this tool. And I think let's start with a very basic installation. So Policy Reporter, for those who maybe don't know the tool, has three parts. We have at first, or one of the first features, where are the notification pushes to tool like Loki and Grafana metrics, because Kyverno ships with performance metrics, but not with metrics um, about your violation reports. And with this installation, I installed 3 parts. We have the Policy Reporter core application for push notifications, metrics, and REST APIs. We have the UI I will show you next. And we have the
Yes, and sorry to interrupt you. Can you increase the font size of the terminal, Frank?
so
One more. Yes, that's good. That's good. Thank you.
So yeah, we basically installed a core application with our Kyverno plugin and set our UI to enabled. Now I will show this UI. So the UI was intended as an alternative to known monitoring solutions like Grafana and Prometheus. Because yeah, if you want to try out Kyverno in your small playground cluster, you may not have some bigger monitoring tools. And I thought this UI would be a very good experience to just have first insights. With the evolving of Policy Reporter and requests of many more features, Policy Reporter UI become a production ready tool. So it's much more performant than in the first steps. And we also have many more features I will show a bit later. So at first have a look at our pages we have. So it starts with a dashboard about your violations. So you just got an overview, okay, what's not working in my clusters and which namespaces I have issues to fix. Then I got a first overview with some tables about the resources that failed some policies regarding the policy and the rule. I have also a severity and status that I can configure. And a thing I will also show later, we not only have validation sources in Policy Reporter, we can also add auditing for enforced policies. And we will also be able to implement other external tools like the tree view operator. So at next, we have some detail pages because Policy Report CRD is split into the policy report, which is namespace scoped in the cluster policy report, which is cluster scoped. And on these pages, we got much more information. We not only have our failing policies, we also have the passing one, and if available, warning and error policy results. And we got our tables. We can have more details about the current issue, which comes from the policy report result. We can filter our informations to a subset of namespaces. We can also filter for a dedicated policy if we want. Yeah, and as you see, you have much more filters you can use. And yeah, so you can get a look at this one policy set you are interested in and maybe try to fix them or see what you can do to improve your security in your cluster and work with the UI side by side. We have the same pages for our cluster policy results reports with UI. So we have nothing yet. We will see them later. We get a logs page, which is some kind of real-time logging for new violations. So if we go in our terminal and add a new tab and just run in Nginx in our team A namespace, which already exists, in team B, we should see that we got some new pushes. So already there, we have our violation issues related to our pod we just created. And we also got some issues to a job that is started when the Nginx was created. So that's just a try-out solution for this push notification feature, which you can also integrate in Slack, Microsoft Teams, Discord, Loki, Elasticsearch, and many others. You can see them in the documentation under the target section, where you have some details about each integration and how this looks like in the different tools, like Loki, for example. So if you want to integrate it in your infrastructure, just have a look at the targets page and see if your solution is supported. If not, feel free to create an feature request. It should no big deal to add more targets to this tool. And then we come to the Kyverno specific part. So that's where the Kyverno plugin comes into play for Policy Reporter. So these informations are not based on the policy report results like the other pages. This comes from directly from the Kyverno CRDs. And you see a list of your applied policies in your cluster. You can just have a look at the created YAML, which maybe is should be a bit better. So yeah, it's just the result of your policy which was applied. You can copy them if you want to try it out in another cluster. And we have our detailed pages where we see all information related to this policy. So you see if some details about it. You can see if there are some AutoGAN controllers. So AutoGAN controller, for those who are not familiar with it, if you're creating a policy in Kyverno related to a pod, Kyverno can automatically create sub-rules or additional rules to also cover daemon sets, deployments, jobs, and stateful sets, as well as cron jobs. So you only have to write your policy against the pod, and Kyverno does the rest automatically for you. You can also configure and change this, but by default, it's activated. So then we see that we have for this one policy for our past results and null fail results. Then we can see which rules are in this policy. So as I said, we have the original one for pods and also the AutoGAN ones for the sub-resources. And as we know from the detailed pages, also our results in the table. And the last one is the verify image page. So Kyverno has in its latest features supply chain security features like the verification images policies, where you can check if your images have the signature you expected. And this page is just a table of your verification image policies to have an overview of your applied policies. So I can maybe show this one real quick. So we have this policy. Which tests this test verify image with the signature. And if we have a pod without the correct signature, the pod will fail to create because we have an enforce mode. And if it has the right signature, it just will create as expected. So that's the current or the state of the UI. That is not that new. So these pages were available since the first version, I think. Maybe we can now come to a few new features in the UI. And one of the latest one, which was requested from the community, was the support for multi-cluster. So maybe we have a short look on the configuration. So as you saw, there was only our results for the given cluster, but often you have many different clusters for staging, development, testing, and so on. And if you want to run Policy Reporter with the UI in each of them, it's quite hard to switch between the different dashboards. And so I have implemented this clusters feature where you can first set a cluster name for your current cluster. This is our local Minikube cluster. And then we can add additional ones with a custom name and 2 API endpoints. The API one is required, and the Kyverno API is like the plugin itself optional. And if we apply policy reporter with these values. So now we can update. Okay. Maybe we are on the wrong cluster. Or do we? Demo gods help. So okay, now it's working. So as you see, we have a new select option, and this is just a switch between our different clusters. So we have now our Minikube cluster, and now we can also switch to the container-based demo application I have prepared. And in this one, you see much more workloads because we have some more tools installed. And we also have cluster policy reports in this one because it's also running the Falco policy report output. So we have Falco integrated in our policy reporter. And we can also show in this dashboard some informations about the events that happened. For example, some cluster role creation. We have also support for Kubebench in our policy report installation in this one, as well as the tree operator with some RBAC checks and vulnerability and config audit checks. So as you see, it's not only a tool for Kyverno, while it's often is used for Kyverno. We have many more integrations these days. A few of them are created and maintained by the Kubernetes policy working group, like the integration for Kubebench. Also, Falco was implemented from the working group, but also some other private tools like the tree operator integration, which I wrote. And yeah, it should be helpful to not have many different dashboards, but only one with a general overview of all your used security tools. And then we can also switch to a third one, which is my playground cluster, which has also some more workloads and no Kyverno plugin installed. So we only have our policy and cluster policy report pages. Yeah, and that's one of the latest features, and it's well adopted. And yeah. Any questions for now?
No, that looks wonderful. Like I think the multi-cluster support is always we're looking at it because more often we work on not just one cluster, but we work on different multi-cluster as well. And one of the integration you talk about is our Kubebench, and the people who are really new to the Kubebench is what the tool is does. If from the Aqua security team, it checks the Kubernetes cluster is deployed according to security best practices as defined in the CIS Kubernetes benchmark. So what so that's a great integration the policy reporter is in as well because we have to look at the cluster and look and see what are the misconfiguration we have, and that is visible to you on this policy reporter CLI. And I can see in the cluster report policies called cluster policy reports, we have a privy RBAC assessment. So, can you elaborate on this part? Like, we know that there's a challenges in Kubernetes around role-based access control. If I look at the policy report, Kyverno policy report UI, what this information giving us, and if this giving us some information about we need to fix something, where we should go and where should we fix those things?
Yeah, maybe I give a short introduction to the source of this information. So there is a kind of new tool. It's the Trivia operator. It's a Kubernetes implementation for the Trivia scanner with some or many different types of checks you can do. We have the vulnerability scans and the configuration audit scans, which are kind of best practices like define requests and limits. And I think it was one of the latest checks are the RBAC assessment checks. And this show you that, for example, do not allow management of RBAC resources. So it gives you a hint how your, or if your RBACs have too much um, rights. So maybe you should reduce them a bit. Um, and yeah, it gives you also a hint if your cluster role, for example, has permissions to create or update pods, which are security risks. So in this case, we have the admin role, which should have such kind of permissions. But if you also create your own cluster roles and cluster role bindings, you should have a look that you only apply this the permissions you really need in your case. And this will or should help you with such kind of decisions. And like in the other reports, you also have for this some kind of filters. So if you want to filter for a dedicated rule, you can just do that. As for other policy reports, and check if you really want that this cluster role can manage secrets, for example. Yeah, and maybe to show how this information from the trivia operator comes into Policy Reporter. So trivia operator by default creates some CRDs, so custom resource definitions. And I think it's in the documentation. We can see them, for example, the vulnerability report. But these are, as you see on the API version, tightly coupled to the trivia operator, so it's no general standard. And to be able to see this kind of reports also in Policy Reporter UI, I created a tool, the trivia operator policy adapter. And the simple logic of this adapter is to fetch for the CRDs related to trivia operator and just match them into or convert them into policy reports. And with this CRD, we are able, like Kyverno, to use it together with the policy reporter. So you have different configurations. If you only want a subset of the CRDs be converted, like the vulnerability report or the config audit report. But in general, you can convert each CRD, which is available in the trivia operator, to a policy report. And yeah, this is one sort of integration of the policy report CRD into other tools like the tree operator. In this case, there's also an adapter for Tracy, which is runtime security, also from the Aqua team. And as we saw, Falco and Kubebench has also its integration tools.
Yes, that's great. So if we can install today as a policy reporter UI, are these integration available by default, or we have to use extra flag to integrate those things after we install policy reporter?
So these integrations are not really has not to be configured in Policy Reporter, because the Policy Reporter as well as the UI just process policy reports. They are not these tools are not interested of the source. So if you want trivia operator support, you have to install this adapter tool, which is also available as Helm chart in this case. And then it creates the policy resources, the policy report resources, and they're just available. So you can add them at any time or remove them if you not longer needed them, but you don't have to configure anything in Policy Reporter for this.
So I think those CRDs have to be available in the cluster, and Policy Reporter fetch those CRDs and display on the CLI, Kyverno CLI part.
Yeah. One of the newer features which are come with this many new sources you can get are the filter sections. So maybe you have, for example, Trivia Operator, Falco, and Kyverno running in your cluster, and you want to use some target integration like Slack, but you only want to send Kyverno violations to your Slack channel. Then you have the possibility with sources to configure only Kyverno as possible source for your violations. So what Policy Reporter brings on top of these different sources of policy reports is the possibility to route the violations based on the tool or on some other stuff like the namespace to a dedicated Slack channel, or you can also exclude, for example, the trivia operator from your Grafana metrics. That's makes it very flexible to only process the tools you are really want to process in your case. Yeah. But to pick policy reports up from any source, you don't have to configure anything in Policy Reporter, just create your policy reports and they are in.
Yes, that looks wonderful. I think that's a more wonderful information to add into the policy reporter as well. And like like in the we see we have a CRD available in the Kyverno that's got policy reports. So if people are new to this CRD, can you tell to the people what this CRD is brings into the table and how you use this CRD?
Sure. So the policy report CRD comes from the policy reporter working group, from the Kubernetes policy working group. This is a working group in the Kyverno ecosystem to bring a unified way to work with policy engines in Kubernetes. So we have many different tools like as I said, Trivi, we have Falco, we also have Kyverno and maybe Opar as also admission controller. And with each new tool, you have other ways they produce their reports. So this is the GitHub repository of this working group. And the goal of this working group is to unify this kind of reports, that you don't have this many ways to find all your informations. For example, Kubebench has its reports in the log of your pods. As presented, Trivi has its own CRDs. Falco has also many different integrations directly to Slack, but also audit log support. And if you are an operator in your cluster, you have to grab all these different sources. Maybe you only have metrics. And if you have a unified way, you have less work because you know, okay, I have the CRD and I can check the CRD, and tools like Policy Reporter helps me to work with the CRD in a simpler way because I don't have to grab all CRDs across my namespaces and resources and maybe clusters in a multi-cluster environment. I have my UI with all my results and I can filter them. I can send them to my infrastructure like Slack, maybe to Loki. I can show my results in Grafana with some dashboards. And the end goal is to make the life of operators or security related operators much easier.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Thanks very much for the explanation because I think the CRDs brings new additional capabilities. It brings in new capabilities to the Kubernetes cluster. But the hurdle is that you have to manage them, you have to upgrade them, you have to patch them, you have to upgrade them, and that's make the cluster operator's life too much difficult. And I think that's the same pattern following for the Kubernetes in everywhere. Like with the Kubernetes, we have a container engines, we have a CRI, we have a networking, we have a CNI, we have a storage, we have a CSI. And that's a great addition to the policy working group because if adding any tool adding more and more CRDs into the Kubernetes, that's make difficult for the operator because if you install OPA and that's creating new custom resource definitions into the Kubernetes cluster and you install Kyverno, they add more into it. So that's make too much difficult life into it. So I think the working group done a wonderful job of making those standards of bringing in the policy reports, and you can use that for everywhere. So can you like one? I see that we have a policy reporter CLI, and today can we show some of the demos related to the policy reporter CLI? How this helps make it easier for the people working with a policy report.
Yeah, sure. So the policy report CLI is in an early stage. Um, the CLI, yeah, should help to work with the results a bit quicker than the UI because you have to make the UI available. And yeah, in a multi-cluster environment, you maybe have to switch between them if you don't want to configure multi-cluster in a single UI. And this CLI introduces a way to interact with the Kubernetes, with the policy reporter REST API on a CLI base. And yeah, it's just an addition for those who like working with CLIs instead of dashboards. So it's available as standalone CLI, but you can also install it as an plugin for kubectl if you like. So yeah, you can just go to the releases section where you have the different builds for the operating systems, and I have it already installed. So I'm running it as adapter, as plugin, sorry. And yeah, I just have the latest version local on my machine. And what we can do is, for example, list our results in the current namespace. And, mhm. Um, so it's a bit much. So yeah, if you would see in the UI, we have our namespace, we have the kind, the name, our policy and rule. We can also a bit reduce this by only showing the failed results. So we have some arguments to filter them. We also have flags like capital A for all namespaces. We can select resources by labels. So yeah, we just see as in our dashboard our failing resources. And maybe a bit more interesting, we just have also a search command. And in this, you can configure by your own what you want to search for. So we can, for example, have a look at which source are available. We can maybe check what namespace we want to check and what type of results. So we have two sources. We have Kyverno Enforce. We can check this one. Have a look in our default and want only fail results, and then we get our results back. So let's make it easy to find only a small subset of the results you're interested in without checking all policy reports. So if you would check our current policy reports in our cluster, you could see there are a lot and we have many results in them. So if we would check our monitoring policy report, it would be really hard to find these results that are failing and these ones we are interested in. And with the new CLI, we can just check, okay, we want to have a look at the namespace and we are only interested in the failed ones. And then we only have this subset of failed resources we are interested in. And I think that make it much easier to work with the CRD on a CLI base. And you have the same possibilities also for cluster results. So just look at the failed ones. I think there are nothing in this cluster, so we don't see anything. And if we want to check another cluster, we can go to this one, then we check the source and the result. And we want to see RBAC assessment. We have maybe we just have a look at all many different ones. So yeah, it's just working the same way like for the results, for the normal results namespace scope for the cluster ones. I can imagine that the CLE will functionality will increase with more features that comes to the policy reporter. But for now, it's just a simple way to help you to find your results in your cluster. So, and yeah, as you see, you have many different ways to filter them by namespace. You can also change the grouping if you want to see your results by result or by a category. That's depending on your preferences. And you can also filter the kind, namespace, and output on an argument base instead of the search flag. So we have the full list. Then check for single rule policy. We can just do that and use maybe our CLI on a CI/CD pipeline to get a list of the validation results after some checks. So yeah, that's the CLI for now. It's not that much functionality, but I hope it will help some people. And it's just in addition to the Policy Reporter UI and the core application. It's currently under my personal project because it's still in development. At a later time, it will also join the Kyverno organization.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. I think that's a wonderful power of the CLI. And I think the CLI is bringing the capabilities of the CI/CD integration system. Like, let's say we have a GitHub Action supports, and we want some of the CLI command to bring some data into us, and then we can do for something, and we can make other process or other function run on it. Can you see in the future that the CLI, the policy reporter CLI, can be used as a CI/CD or in a CI/CD pipeline? Or if you if you have think about what are the other ways we can use CLI in our development process.
Yeah, so in a CI/CD pipeline, it's more common to use the Kyverno CLI because you are able to test your resource definition against some policies even before they applied in the cluster. I think that makes more sense in most cases. It would be possible after, for example, the Helm installation of your application is done to get a list of this application in running in your cluster with the results of your validations inside of the cluster. Maybe that's a work case for anyone, but yeah, as I said, it's more common to use the Kyverno CLI in these cases to apply your validations even before it's already in the cluster. About possible additional features in the future. So one thing I have on my roadmap, for example, are runtime configuration changes. So for now, if you want to configure additional Slack notification or some changes on your metric configuration, you have to redeploy Policy Reporter Helm chart with the changes. In the future, it should be possible to configure your pushes, for example, with a config map or secret. And I could imagine that the CLI can help to create these config maps and secrets to make the process a bit easier for the end user, and also to help with some GitOps approach that you can create a config map with the CLI per system in any way, and your Argo CD or Flux or any other GitOps tool applies this in your cluster. That would be a good feature, I think. But yeah, that's only one thing on my roadmap.
Yes, that's wonderful. Like if we can see about the GitHub integration, that's really some super useful. And one question I see from the chat, and Waleed Ahmed is saying, how many types of reports we will receive with email reporter?
So about the email integration.
Yes. So question
So
around how.
maybe we can first have a. So which one is it? This one. So maybe a short introduction. So email reports are not like the notification pushes that are just happens when a new violation occurred in your cluster. Email reports are a mechanism for a regular update about your current state of your cluster. So in Kubernetes, it's applied as a cron job. And as a cron job, you are able to configure yourself how often you want to send an email report. So we can see this in this values example. So we have the summary reports with yeah, a schedule for 8 a.m. each day. And there's also a violation report, which has some more details. And yeah, this report is created as often as you configure it. And you can configure it to one or multiple emails. And how this looks like, I have an example here, or maybe a bit bigger here. So this report has all results given in your cluster for each tool you configured it. So as push notifications and other reports, you are able to configure which sources you want to send. In this case, I only send Kyverno violations, and you can extend or reduce this as you like. And we just get our informations about cluster policies we don't have. And then we see our policy report summary with the amount of passed ones and the failed ones. And because the failed ones are that are interesting for us, it also sends a table as we know them from the UI with the detailed informations about the kind, the name, and the policy and rule which are failed. So we are able to find this failed violation in our UI or in the CRD and see more details about what is the issue for this policy and how can we fix them. So the report should help if you are also running in a multi-cluster environment and you don't want to click about all your different clusters. You can just configure each cluster to send a summary report to a central email, and then you have, in a case of 3 clusters, 3 emails, and you can check them one by one with the current state of your security, and you can check if you want to fix them. Or
Yes.
yeah.
And one thing, like we see, there is a multi-cluster support in the policy reporter as well. So in the notification, we can see a box like we have a. We can know this who's this cluster from, where we're fetching the data from, and also there are some people like if some teams are working on some part of the policy reporter, can we see the team member who is responsible for that po- fixation or other kind of things. Can we add those, or are those are not available today, or can we add those information as well?
Um, so what we can do, maybe I can show this also a bit. Um, if you have a kind of multi-tenants cluster with yeah, different teams managing different namespaces, for example, you can configure so-called channels for the different targets. This was also a request from the community I implemented. And a common example would be Slack. I can also show this. So at the beginning, you were only able to configure a single Slack channel where it pushes all notifications that happened. But in a multi-tenancy environment, you want that maybe a dedicated namespace is responsible to a dedicated team. And with this channel feature, you are able to configure multiple webhooks for Slack, for example, with some kind of filters. And these filters includes a filter for namespaces. So maybe I show directly the example I have. In our current cluster, we have a namespace for team A. We have also the possibility to use a wildcard symbol to send all namespaces with a prefix of team A. And we have also a namespace with team B. Then we define that we want only send Kyverno violations. And then we can configure different webhooks for the different channels. And we can also configure an overall webhook. So if we have, for example, an infrastructure channel where we want to have all violations, we can also do that. And with this configuration, we can cluster, and then we can, for example, create an pod for our team B, and because engines already exist, so we created them, and now we should see in our you see nothing because maybe I run it in space A. Now, yeah. So we see now that we have our pushes in the team A channel from Kyverno. And it's also possible to add custom or additional fields to this output if you like, but this configuration can also be done on a channel base. So if we like, we could, for example, add for team A custom fields with some kind of map. So we have, for example, a cluster name. And now this would also be sent only to team A in the Slack channel. And so you are able to route your violations based on different types like namespaces, also policy and severity filters are available. I think also priority filters. And we also see the same violations in our infra channel, which we also get in our informations for other namespaces. So here we see we have the team A ones. Maybe team B was not configured, or maybe the pod was not deployed yet. So yeah, now you see we get our notifications depending on the namespace to our channels. And so we can route our multi-tenancy violations to the team which is responsible for it.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. I love the sport of the multi-tenancy as well. And one question to add here, and Walid is also having another question. Are you planning to extend Policy Reporter UI API endpoints, like getting filtered reports? Because currently API supports only one endpoint.
So can you explain a bit what you mean? So what kind of different APIs? So you have one API for at the policy reporter level, which is consumed by the UI, and you can switch these APIs with this multi-cluster support. But each dashboard is related to a single cluster. You don't have one UI for multiple clusters.
Yes, absolutely. I think you get the point. And Walid, if you have any question, we can add as well. And I another question. I would like to see how the Slack board is set up.
So in Slack, you have the possibility to add incoming webhooks. Maybe I can go back. Um, so, and yeah, you can just configure them by add new webhooks where you can select the channel you want. And if you create one, you get this webhook URL. And this one is configured in our values YAML. So we have Slack as our target, then we configure our webhook, which we created. We have now the policy reporter channel, then we set our webhook, and then we can add sources and filters as we like, but this is the minimum configuration. Configuration from the top. So these ones are will be set on a channel if they are not overwritten. So if we have skip existing on startup set on our root, we don't have to configure it in a channel because it will be also used for the channel configuration. So this is the minimal configuration we need. And now if we have new violations, because we have no filter, it just would also send to the policy reporter Slack channel. And
Yes,
that's it for the Slack configuration. Yeah, it's depending on the tool you use, but the most integrations are straightforward. And as I said, you can have a look at the documentation for the different kinds of targets. And for the most of them, it's very similar. Also, this code has just a webhook you have to set up. And I think it's also the same for Microsoft Teams. And even if you have your own tool or you want to add your own tool, there's also a webhook endpoint where you can configure your own tool with headers and the same filter possibility as the other targets have. So you can also customize this.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And Asib Shokat is saying, great explanation, Frank. I love the conversation today about everything you showed up. Anything missing before we wrap up the discussion?
Yeah,
around Policy Reporter?
maybe one feature I did not show explicit, which was requested a lot the last days. So as I said, the Policy Reporter has an Kyverno integration for Kyverno specific logic because Policy Reporters in the core Kyverno agnostic and can also use with many other tools as we saw. But we, or the most of us know that Kyverno by default only creates policy reports for its audit policies. So if you have an enforced policy and you want to be informed if an enforcement blocked in request, you are not able to do this by default. Kyverno only creates a Kubernetes event, but yeah, events are a bit hard to find and to filter, and we have many of them. And so the Kyverno plugin implemented a feature which is called block reports. And this makes it possible to create policy reports also for Kyverno enforced policies and make them in your cluster available like the audit ones. So you may already saw this in our Minikube cluster. We have this Kyverno enforce page, and these are the reports I mentioned because they were created by the Kyverno plugin, and these are um, resources which creation was rejected because they have was blocked by an enforce policy. So we have this disallow default namespace, and maybe to show that when I try to create an Nginx in my default namespace, it is blocked because it is an enforce policy. And now we see we have a second violation and we just have a second entry. So now it's also possible to see our enforce policies in the policy reporter, and also can notify for this informations in our infrastructure like Slack. And maybe last but not least, very short one, there's also a monitoring integration, and these dashboards are also created by the subcharts. So if you set the integration for monitoring over the Prometheus operator up, you get a service monitor configuration, and you get 3 dashboards. So you can also integrate them in your Grafana. With the filters you saw in the UI, they are also available in the dashboards. And I think now I'm done.
Thank you very much. Wonderful explanation for all of these kind of stuff. So today, I love to see the Policy Reporter CLI. Today, one of the newest thing add. There is so much capability into it. And when we last time met, I think there's a very little amount of things available in the Policy Reporter. But as of today, we have so much integration into it, and so many additional values are adding each day. So that's a great way to talk about it as well. So keep a look at this project as well, and that's a great way to explore and try out this new feature. And I will share the link with you because you can see in the Kubernetes 1.25, the pod security policies are now deprecated, and you need a pod security admission, and it works wonderfully well with the Kyverno. And we have a podcast previously with the Jim Bagwadia. You can check it out. And also, there's a link for you to go check out Kubernetes 1.25 PSP has been removed. So you take a look at it, what's that mean to you, and try out Kyverno, the Kubernetes policy engine. One of the things love about it is because you don't need to learn any new language to write policies in Kubernetes cluster. Here's a GitHub repository for you, and here's a wonderful article from a friend of mine, from developer guys, securing and automating Kubernetes. This is actually a webinar that I done on this on the cloud native Islam was securing and automating Kubernetes cluster with Kyverno. And here's a link for you to Kubernetes BSA admission controller is stable in Kubernetes 1.25, and you look to stay ahead of it. And it's a Kyverno policy reporter. So this is a repository. You can look at it, and try out this in your free time and tell us about what new functionality you want to see in the Kyverno Policy Reporter. And Frank is a person for you to keep chatting about Kyverno policies in the Twitter handle or the Slack channel, the Kubernetes, or any other social media platform. And here's a good article around examining the pod security admission, because these are the built in by default and give you by Kubernetes. And another wonderful article from my friend of mine from Developer Guy is securing container-based images using Kyverno policies, because we see that images can have vulnerabilities inside those. How do we fix them? How do we replace them? How we extract the build information from them? This is all one great article that explains a lot of this. And this is another good article around using Kubernetes admission controller. And that's another article from the developer guy. And this is a demo that we showed today to you by Policy Reporter CRD demo. You can check it out on the Frank Jogalite GitHub repository. And this is a link, and this might be moved and officially might be moved in a few days' time, the Policy Reporter CLI into the Kyverno GitHub repository, so you stay ahead of it. And this is one last thing we talk about during the show, the Trevi operator from the Aqua Security team. So these are the all links available in the chat. So grab them up and start learning about it. And hope this was a wonderful session for everyone. I learned a lot the policy reporter, and this last time we have this is not available at the GA, but today I look at it. You can use it in production environment, because this is so much stuff into it, and all the things that you need today is available on the Policy Reporter CLI. So thank you very much for tuning into this channel on the Cloud Native FM, and start following Frank on the Twitter. And we have to see you again in the future. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.